In the year 2357, Earth had become an interstellar hub, a shining beacon of human achievement nestled in the cosmos. Neo-Tokyo, the crown jewel of Earth's cities, gleamed with towering skyscrapers and neon lights that stretched into the night sky, reflecting the diverse cultures of the galaxy. It was a place where humans and aliens coexisted. Traders, diplomats, and travelers from every corner of the universe wandered its streets. Among the many species visiting Earth, the Xilirians stood out the most. They were tall, graceful beings, their skin shimmering like living crystal under the lights of the city. The Xilirians were known for their advanced technology and vast wealth, but also for their condescension toward lesser races. To them, humans were a primitive species, admirable for their ingenuity but laughable for their sentimentality. 15-year-old Luca Ortiz had always been fascinated by the idea of life beyond Earth. Growing up in Neo-Tokyo, he'd encountered more alien species than most kids his age could imagine. Yet, despite his awe of the universe's vast diversity, Luca had a grounded, humble heart. While his friends dreamed of riches or fame, Luca spent his free time volunteering at shelters, helping those who had been left behind in the rapid technological advancements of the future. It was on one such night, while delivering food to the homeless, that Luca's story began. The streets of Neo-Tokyo were crowded as usual, bustling with vendors, tourists, and workers making their way home from their shifts. The smell of street food filled the air, mingling with the electric hum of floating vehicles that zipped through the city. Luca carried a small bag of supplies, fresh bread, rice, and a few blankets donated by the shelter. His destination was an alley near the lower part of the city, a place where those who had nothing sought refuge from the gleaming city above. Luca turned a corner and entered the alley. The further he walked, the dimmer the lights became, until the neon glow of the city was barely a flicker in the distance. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the distant hum of life felt far away. In the corner of the alley, he saw her, a frail old woman sitting against the wall, wrapped in ragged clothes that barely shielded her from the evening chill. Her face was hidden beneath a hood, and her hands trembled as she clutched at her thin, patched-up cloak. The other homeless people in the area seemed to avoid her, casting sideways glances as they huddled together for warmth. Luca's heart ached at the sight. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling down. "Are you hungry? I brought some food." The woman looked up, and though her face was obscured by shadow, Luca could see the gleam of her eyes beneath the hood. There was something unsettling in those eyes, something ancient and deep. But Luca ignored the strange feeling and handed her a piece of bread. She took it with shaking hands, her voice a raspy whisper. "Thank you, child," she murmured, her words carrying a weight beyond mere gratitude. Before Luca could respond, a cold laugh echoed from behind him. He turned to see a group of Xilirian teenagers, hovering a few feet above the ground with their anti-gravity belts, their bioluminescent skin glowing softly in the dim alley. The leader of the group, Zalak, had a cruel smirk on his face, his eyes gleaming with superiority as he floated closer. "What do we have here?" Zalak sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "A human boy wasting his time on this beggar?" The others laughed, their shimmering skin flashing different colors in response to their amusement. Xilirians communicated in part through light, their skin glowing in different hues to express emotions. Right now, their skins were bright with derision. Luca stood, anger boiling inside him, but he kept his voice calm. "She's just an old woman. She needs help." "Help?" Zalak scoffed. "Is that what humans think strength is? Helping the weak? Pathetic." He floated closer, peering down at the old woman. "In our society, the weak are left behind. Only the strong survive. You humans have always been too soft. It's why you'll never be more than caretakers of this little planet." Luca's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had dealt with Xilirians before, their arrogance was as ingrained as their shimmering scales. He knew confronting them would only make things worse. Kindness isn't weakness, Luca said quietly, his voice steady despite his anger. It takes strength to help others when no one else will. Zalak rolled his eyes, his skin pulsing a disdainful orange. Listen to yourself. No wonder humans are stuck on this primitive little rock. Keep wasting your time on beggars, boy. See where it gets you. With that, Zalak and his friends floated away, their mocking laughter echoing down the alley. Luca watched them leave, his jaw tight. He hated feeling powerless in moments like this, but he knew that violence wasn't the answer. When the sound of their laughter had faded, Luca turned back to the woman. She had lowered her hood slightly, revealing a face lined with age, but her eyes. They were not the eyes of a simple beggar. They were glowing faintly, with a strange, deep light that seemed to see far beyond the physical world. For a moment, Luca felt an inexplicable sense of awe. Do not be troubled by their words, child, the woman said, her voice stronger now, though still raspy. What you did today, it is a rare thing in this world. Luca blinked, surprised by her sudden change in tone. It's just the right thing to do. The old woman smiled, though there was a sadness in her expression. Kindness is a gift too few possess these days. You are different, Luca Ortiz. He froze. How did she know his name? Before he could ask, the woman pulled her hood back up, hiding her face once more. Remember, child, she whispered, her voice low and mysterious, there is strength in what the eyes cannot see. Luca felt a shiver run down his spine, but before he could respond, the woman stood, her frail body seeming to regain some hidden strength. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. For a long moment, Luca stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been. The encounter had left him shaken, not by the cruelty of the Zalirians, but by the strange presence of the old woman. There was something about her, something otherworldly. As he walked back through the neon-lit streets of Neo-Tokyo, Luca couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. That old woman, whoever she was, had stirred something inside him, something that would change the course of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The encounter with the old woman stayed with Luca for days. He found himself replaying the scene in his mind, the strange glow in her eyes, the way she had spoken his name without him telling her. There was something off about it, something he couldn't quite explain. The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. But life in Neo-Tokyo moved fast, and Luca soon found himself swept up in the everyday rhythms of his life school, his volunteer work at the shelter, and, of course, his growing obsession with space travel. Still, he couldn't forget the beggar woman. Every time he walked the streets, he found himself glancing down alleys, searching for her. But it was as if she had vanished. No one else at the shelter had seen her, and no other homeless person seemed to know who she was. As the days passed, Neo-Tokyo buzzed with excitement about an upcoming diplomatic event. The Zalirians had planned a grand summit to celebrate a new trade agreement between Earth and their home planet, Zalira. The event was a big deal. Zalirian leaders and dignitaries from across the galaxy would attend, as well as high-ranking human officials. The Zalirians, as always, relished being the center of attention. Luca wasn't exactly looking forward to it. The arrogance of the Zalirians, especially the younger ones like Zalak, had left a sour taste in his mouth. But like everyone else, he couldn't avoid the excitement. The summit would be the biggest intergalactic event on Earth in years, and Neo-Tokyo was buzzing with preparation. Streets were being cleaned, buildings decorated, and security tightened. A week before the summit, something happened that shattered Luca's routine. It was evening, and Luca was on his way home from the shelter, walking through the same backstreets where he had first encountered the beggar. The neon lights above flickered in their usual rhythmic patterns, casting eerie glows on the buildings. The air was thick with humidity, a typical night in Neo-Tokyo. Luca's mind wandered as he made his way through the city. That's when he saw her again. The beggar woman. She was standing in the same alley as before, her frail form wrapped in those same ragged clothes, though her stance seemed a little stronger now. She was looking directly at him, as if she had been waiting for him. Luca's heart raced. He had 100 questions ready, but none of them made it past his lips. Instead, he slowly approached her. "You," he said, his voice hesitant. "I've been looking for you." The woman gave him a knowing smile, her hood still drawn low over her face. "I know, Luca Ortiz. And I have been waiting." He blinked, still unsettled by how she knew his name. "How do you know who I am?" The woman's smile faded, and her glowing eyes locked onto his. "There is much more to this world than what meets the eye. Your kindness has not gone unnoticed, child." Luca frowned. "What do you mean?" "I just helped you, that's all." Her voice softened, and there was a mysterious weight behind her words. "What you did was more than an act of charity. You reached out in compassion, in a time when few would. In a time when my people have grown blind to the needs of others." Luca's confusion deepened. "Your people?" The woman straightened her back, her frail appearance slipping for just a moment, revealing a hint of something grander. Something regal. Luca took a step back, unsure of what he was seeing. Then, in a movement so swift it was almost imperceptible, the old woman raised her hands, and a soft light surrounded her. Her ragged clothes shimmered, dissolving into thin air. Her body straightened, and her hunched form disappeared. Before Luca's stunned eyes, the beggar transformed into a figure of breathtaking grace and beauty, a tall Zolarian woman with flowing, iridescent robes, her once hidden face now revealed in all its otherworldly splendor. Luca gasped, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. "I am not who I appeared to be," the woman said, her voice now clear and commanding. "I am Queen Lyra of the Zolarians, rightful ruler of my people. Or, at least, I once was." Luca's heart pounded in his chest. He stepped back, wide-eyed. "Why, you're the queen?" But everyone thought you were dead. The Zolarians have been talking about your disappearance for years." Queen Lyra nodded, her face a mixture of sorrow and strength. "That is what they wanted my people to believe. It was easier to seize power if I was out of the way." Luca couldn't believe what he was hearing. The beggar he had helped was the missing queen of the Zolarians? The queen whose disappearance had plunged Zolyra into political chaos? He had read about her in school, seen the stories on the news, the great Queen Lyra, who had vanished without a trace, leaving the Zolarian aristocracy to rule in her absence. But why were you in disguise? Living as a beggar? The queen's glowing eyes softened as she looked at Luca. "Because I needed to see the truth of what my people had become. I hid among them, living in the shadows of their arrogance and greed, to understand how far they had fallen. I saw how they looked down on others, how they mocked those they believed to be beneath them. And it was there, in the darkest corners, that I found you." Luca was speechless. His mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. "But why me? Why did you reveal yourself to me?" Lyra smiled gently. "Because you are different, Luca. When others turned their backs, you showed kindness. You did not seek power, nor did you care for appearances. You acted from the heart, something my people have forgotten. And now, I need your help." "My help?" Luca asked, incredulous. "What could I possibly do? I'm just a kid. I'm not a politician, or a soldier, or anyone important." Lyra stepped forward, her presence almost overwhelming. "What you are, Luca, is someone who still believes in compassion. And that is the greatest strength of all. The summit in Neo-Tokyo will be the moment when my people's future is decided. If we continue down the path of arrogance and pride, the Zolarians will destroy themselves. But if we remember the value of kindness and unity, there may still be hope." Luca swallowed hard. This was too much. A week ago, he was a normal teenager, volunteering at shelters, dreaming about space travel. And now, an alien queen was asking him to help save her people? "But what can I do?" You can stand beside me, Queen Lyra said softly. When I reveal myself at the summit, I will need someone by my side to show the Xelirians what true strength is. Someone who embodies the very qualities they have forgotten. Someone who, like you, understands that strength comes not from power, but from empathy. Luca stared at her, his mind spinning. He was just a regular kid. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. But as he looked into Queen Lyra's glowing eyes, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. Okay, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his head. I'll help you. Lyra smiled, and for the first time, Luca saw hope in her eyes. Thank you, Luca Ortiz, she said softly. Together, we will remind my people what it means to be truly strong. As they walked side by side through the streets of Neo-Tokyo, Luca couldn't help but wonder what would happen at the summit end, whether his small act of kindness was truly enough to change the fate of an entire race. The days leading up to the summit passed in a blur for Luca. His once ordinary life had been turned upside down by Queen Lyra's revelation. He was no longer just a boy from Neo-Tokyo, he had been thrust into a political drama that spanned the galaxy. The weight of what was coming, the summit, the reveal of Queen Lyra's true identity, and the role he was expected to play pressed on him, growing heavier with each passing hour. Luca spent most of his time with Queen Lyra in the days before the summit, learning more about the Xelirian people and their fall from grace. The more she told him, the clearer it became just how deeply the Xelirians had been corrupted. Their once proud society, which had once valued honor and unity, had become obsessed with status and power. The aristocracy, led by the cold and cunning Lord Rickson, had manipulated the disappearance of their queen to consolidate their control. As Lyra spoke, Luca could hear the pain in her voice. She had watched her people become something unrecognizable, and now she was determined to stop them from spiraling further into arrogance. But it wouldn't be easy. The Xelirians were powerful, and the leaders who had taken control in her absence would not easily relinquish their grip. One evening, as the sun set over Neo-Tokyo and bathed the city in shades of orange and purple, Lyra and Luca sat on a balcony overlooking the skyline. The hum of traffic and the flicker of neon lights filled the air. The summit was the next day, and the gravity of what was to come weighed on them both. Are you sure they'll listen? Luca asked, breaking the silence. I mean, the Xelirians I've met. They're not exactly the type to be swayed by a speech about compassion. Lyra's glowing eyes softened as she gazed at the city below. They have been blinded by their own pride for too long. Many will resist the truth, but it is not only the leaders we must reach, it's the people. They've been led astray, but deep down, I believe they still remember what it means to be Xelirian. They must be reminded of the values we once held dear. Luca nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He couldn't shake the memory of Zalak and his friends, mocking him for helping the beggar. How could people like that change? And you really think I'm the right person for this? Luca asked, doubt creeping into his voice. I'm just a human. I don't have any special powers or influence. Why would they listen to me? Lyra turned to him, her expression kind but firm. Because you embody the very thing they need to understand. Strength isn't about power or dominance. It's about empathy, compassion, and understanding. You showed that when you helped me, without asking for anything in return. That is what makes you special, Luca. And that is what will make them listen. Luca took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't sure he was ready for what was about to happen, but he knew he couldn't back down now. He had to see this through, not just for Lyra, but for himself. The next day, the summit began. Neo-Tokyo's Skyport Citadel, a massive floating palace that hovered high above the city, was the site of the event. The building itself was a marvel of human and alien engineering, a vast structure of glass and steel, suspended by anti-gravity technology and adorned with holographic displays that shimmered like waterfalls of light. Leaders from across the galaxy had gathered there, representing dozens of alien races, each with their own agendas, alliances, and rivalries. The Zillyrians, of course, were the center of attention. Their delegation, led by Lord Rixon, arrived in a dazzling procession of floating ships, their opulent robes glittering in the sunlight. The crowd below cheered as the Zillyrians descended, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with bright colors. They moved with an air of superiority, their heads held high as if the very idea of mingling with other species was beneath them. Luca stood just outside the grand hall, watching the scene unfold on a large screen with Lyra at his side. She had returned to her beggar disguise, her form once again hunched and cloaked in rags. Despite her regal presence, she knew the timing of her reveal had to be perfect. Inside the hall, the summit began with speeches from various dignitaries. Earth's ambassadors spoke of trade agreements, Zillyrian diplomats boasted of their technological advancements, and leaders from other species shared news of their worlds. But Luca barely listened. His focus was on Lord Rixon. Rixon stood tall among the other leaders, his posture radiating control and arrogance. His eyes gleamed as he spoke, and his voice echoed through the chamber with cold authority. Luca had never met him personally, but he knew enough about the Zillyrian aristocrat to understand the danger Lyra faced. Rixon had profited greatly from her disappearance, using it as an opportunity to solidify his power. He wouldn't give it up easily. When Rixon's speech ended, the hall erupted in applause. He smiled smugly, accepting the praise like a king acknowledging his subjects. Luca's hands clenched into fists as he watched. How could someone so corrupt hold so much power? "It's time," Lyra said softly, interrupting his thoughts. She stepped forward, heading toward the entrance to the grand hall. Luca's heart pounded in his chest as he followed her. This was it. Everything they had planned came down to this moment. As they entered the hall, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to the old beggar woman and the young human boy who had dared to interrupt the grand proceedings. The Zillyrians, in particular, were taken aback. Some recognized Luca from his earlier encounter with Zalek. Others simply sneered at the sight of a lowly human and a vagrant entering such a prestigious event. Rixon's cold gaze fell upon them, his eyes narrowing in disdain. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dripping with contempt. "Who dares to bring a beggar into the summit?" Before anyone could answer, the air around the beggar shimmered. Luca took a step back as Queen Lyra began to transform. Her rags fell away, replaced by shimmering robes of flowing light. Her hunched form straightened, and her face, once hidden beneath the hood, now radiated with regal authority. Gasps echoed through the hall as the Zillyrians realized who was standing before them. Queen Lyra had returned. "Impossible!" Rixon hissed, his face paling. "You were dead?" Lyra finished for him, her voice calm but powerful. "That is what you wanted my people to believe, Rixon. But I am very much alive. And I have seen the darkness you've led them into." The room was deathly silent as Lyra stepped forward, her presence commanding every eye in the hall. Even the alien dignitaries, who knew little of Zillyrian politics, were captivated by her sudden appearance. "You," she continued, her glowing eyes locking onto Rixon, "have poisoned our people with your greed and pride. You have made them forget what it means to be Zillyrian. To value compassion, unity, and the strength of a shared purpose." Rixon's eyes darted around the room, searching for support among the aristocrats who had allied themselves with him. But they were silent, stunned into submission by the return of their queen. "And you," Lyra said, turning to address the gathered Zillyrians, "you allowed yourselves to be led astray. You mocked those weaker than you, believing that strength came only from power and dominance. But true strength lies in the heart, in the ability to show kindness, even when others will not." She gestured to Luca, who stood awkwardly beside her, unsure of what to do. "This human boy," Lyra said, her voice ringing through the hall, "showed more strength than any of you. When I was nothing but a beggar in your streets, cast aside and ignored, he helped me. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because he saw another being in need. That is the strength we have lost." Luca's cheeks burned with embarrassment as all eyes turned to him. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in front of a crowd this important. But as he stood there, beside the queen, he realized something. This wasn't about him. It was about the message Lyra was trying to send. Rixon's face twisted in fury. You think a human boy can teach us what it means to be strong? He is nothing. Weak, like all his kind. Luca's fists clenched, but before he could speak, Lyra stepped forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. And yet it is you, Rixon, who cowers before the truth. You, who sought to hide my return because you knew it would mean the end of your reign of fear. Rixon's mouth opened to retort, but no words came out. The room had turned against him. The Zolirians, once arrogant and unshakable, now looked uncertain. They glanced at each other, and then at Luca, the human boy who had done what they, with all their power and superiority, had failed to do. Luca stood taller, feeling the shift in the room. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: the Zolirians had been forced to confront the truth, and there was no turning back. The confrontation had begun, and now the fate of an entire people rested on what came next. The air in the grand hall of the Skyport Citadel was heavy with tension. Luca could feel it pressing down on him, almost suffocating in its intensity. The eyes of every dignitary, alien, and Zolirian in the room were focused on him and Queen Lyra. Even the holographic displays, which usually flickered with the constant movement of galactic news and interstellar markets, seemed frozen in time, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Rixon stood at the center of it all, his tall frame rigid with anger, his skin flashing a deep, furious red, the color of a Zolirian cornered. His eyes glowed with a venomous intensity as he faced Queen Lyra, his hands trembling slightly. The once invincible Lord Rixon, the man who had controlled the Zolirian Empire for years, now found himself facing the one opponent he had never expected, his rightful queen. You have no place here, Lyra, Rixon snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Your time is over. My people have thrived under my rule, under the rule of the strong. You disappeared. You abandoned us. Lyra stepped forward, her regal form shining with the soft glow of her bioluminescent skin. There was no fear in her eyes, only a calm, unwavering determination. I did not abandon our people, Rixon, she replied, her voice firm but measured. I watched as you led them down a path of cruelty and arrogance. I saw what we had become, a society obsessed with power and status, mocking those we deemed weaker than ourselves. But strength is not measured by how high we stand, but by how far we are willing to reach down to lift others up. Her words echoed through the hall, causing a ripple of murmurs among the Zolirians. Many of them had followed Rixon's vision of a strong, elite society, but now, confronted with their queen's return and her message of compassion, doubt was beginning to creep into their minds. Rixon's lips twisted into a snarl. Compassion? Unity? These are the words of the weak. Our people are destined for greatness, not coddling the lesser races. You speak of strength as if it can be found in helping those who cannot help themselves. But what I have built, that is real strength. Luca, who had been silent until now, felt a surge of anger rise within him. He stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with conviction. What you've built, Rixon, is a house of fear. You ruled by making others feel small, by convincing them that kindness is a weakness. But you're wrong. I'm just a kid, and I don't have your power or your wealth, but I know this helping someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. Rixon's gaze snapped to Luca, his eyes narrowing in contempt. A human child dares to lecture me on strength? You know nothing of what it means to lead an empire. Luca didn't back down. I know enough to see that you're afraid. Afraid that people might start listening to Queen Lyra. Afraid that they'll realize you're not as strong as you pretend to be. The room went deathly quiet. For a long moment, Rixon simply stared at Luca, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, Rickson stepped forward, his bioluminescent skin glowing a deep crimson. His voice was low and dangerous. "Do you truly believe that this Queen," he spat the word, "can lead us again? After all these years in hiding, she expects us to follow her? To embrace the weakness that will doom our people?" A murmur of uncertainty swept through the crowd. Luca could feel the room teetering on a knife's edge, caught between Rickson's vision of strength through dominance and Lyra's message of compassion. Then, Lyra raised her hand, silencing the hall with a single graceful gesture. "I did not come to reclaim power, Rickson," she said, her voice calm but powerful. "I came to remind our people of who we once were. We were not always consumed by this hunger for control. There was a time when we stood united, when we valued wisdom, empathy, and the strength that comes from standing together, not towering over others." She turned to face the Zillyrians gathered in the hall, her glowing eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Look at yourselves," Lyra said, her voice growing softer, more personal. "We have become so focused on maintaining our place at the top that we have forgotten what it means to be truly strong. Strength is not found in isolation, nor in dominating others. It is found in community, and lifting others up. That is why I return to remind you that there is another way. A better way." Luca watched as the Zillyrians began to exchange glances. Some of them still wore expressions of defiance, but many others looked thoughtful, even uncertain. They had lived under Rickson's rule for years, believing his vision of strength was the only path. But now, with Queen Lyra standing before them, they were beginning to question everything. Rickson, however, was not so easily swayed. His face twisted into a sneer as he addressed the crowd. "Do not be fooled by her words," he shouted, his voice laced with venom. "She speaks of weakness, of kindness and empathy, but these are the luxuries of the powerless. We have survived because we are strong, because we have taken what is ours. Do you truly wish to throw that away for the false promises of a queen who abandoned us?" His words rang out across the hall, and for a moment, the crowd seemed to waver. But then, a single voice spoke up. "She didn't abandon us." Luca turned toward the voice and was surprised to see that it was Zalak, the same Zillyrian who had mocked him in the alley not long ago. Zalak stepped forward, his bioluminescent skin glowing with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. I saw her," Zalak continued, his voice uncertain but growing stronger. "When she was disguised as a beggar. I mocked her. I mocked Luca. But it wasn't him who was weak. It was me. I thought strength meant being better than others, but I was wrong." Rickson's face contorted in fury. "You would betray your own people for the words of a child?" Zalak met Rickson's gaze, his expression steadying. "I would choose a better path. One where we don't have to live in fear of being seen as weak. One where we can be strong together." Another Zillyrian stepped forward, then another. Slowly, more and more Zillyrians began to stand with Zalak, their faces filled with a mixture of shame and hope. The tide was turning. Rickson's fury reached a boiling point. His skin glowed a violent red as he pointed an accusatory finger at Lyra. "You are a fool if you think this changes anything. I will not allow you to destroy everything I have built." But before Rickson could say another word, Lyra raised her hand once more, and this time, her voice was filled with a calm authority that silenced even him. "Your time is over, Rickson," she said softly. "The people have spoken." Rickson's face twisted in rage, but he could see it in the faces of the Zillyrians around him. They were no longer his to command. The power he had wielded for so long, the control he had fought so hard to maintain, was slipping away. With a final, furious glare at Queen Lyra, Rickson turned and stormed out of the hall, his defeat unmistakable. The room was quiet for a long moment as the Zillyrians and the gathered dignitaries processed what had just happened. Then, one by one, the Zillyrians began to kneel before their queen, acknowledging her return and the new path she had offered them. Luca stood beside her, still in awe of everything that had unfolded. He had never imagined that his small act of kindness helping a beggar in the streets would lead to something like this. But as he watched the Zillyrians kneeling before Queen Lyra, he realized that sometimes, even the smallest actions could spark the greatest changes. Lyra turned to him, her eyes soft and full of gratitude. "You have done more than you know, Luca. You helped me remind my people of who they are." Luca smiled, though he still felt a bit overwhelmed. "I didn't do much. I just helped someone who needed it." "And that," Lyra said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, "is the true strength that will shape the future." As the summit came to a close and the Zillyrians began to forge a new path, Luca couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Not just for the Zillyrians, but for everyone. If a single act of kindness could change the fate of an entire people, then maybe, just maybe, the future was brighter than he had ever imagined.